Make the help clean it. Carter Whitmore's voice rang across the ballroom just seconds before the slice of triple-layer vanilla cake slammed into Vanessa Brooks' chest. The impact was soft, almost childish, but the silence that followed hit harder than anything else in the room. Frosting slid slowly down the front of her black designer gown, dripping onto the polished marble floor beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Whitmore Grand Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. A violin quartet continued playing near the stage for 2 awkward seconds before the musicians finally stopped. Nearly 300 guests froze mid-conversation. Champagne glasses hovered in the air. Several phones remained pointed toward the stage because the birthday gala was still being live-streamed to investors, reporters, and social media followers across the country. Vanessa didn't move. She stood perfectly still beneath the gold glow of the ballroom lights, while white frosting clung to the fabric near her collarbone. Across from her, 13-year-old Carter Whitmore burst into laughter so loud it echoed off the mirrored walls. Then came the sound that shifted the atmosphere completely. His parents laughed too. Richard Whitmore leaned back with a grin, one hand resting casually inside the pocket of his tailored tuxedo, while Evelyn Whitmore pressed manicured fingers against her lips, as if her son had done something adorable instead of humiliating a guest in front of Manhattan's financial elite. "Oh my God," Evelyn said through soft laughter. "He gets dramatic when there's sugar involved." A few people near their table chuckled nervously, not because they found it funny, but because wealthy people often trained entire rooms to follow their emotional lead. Vanessa slowly lifted her eyes toward Carter. The boy smirked without apology. He looked too comfortable doing it, too certain there would be no consequences. Frosting continued sliding down her dress in thick white streaks while camera flashes flickered from the back of the ballroom. The giant LED screen above the stage still displayed the logo for the Whitmore-Blackstone partnership announcement scheduled for later that evening. $700 million. That was the number glowing behind her, while silence spread through the room like cold water. Vanessa reached calmly for a linen napkin from a nearby table. No sudden movement. No anger. Just composure. That somehow made the moment even more uncomfortable. "Carter," Richard finally said, though his tone carried amusement instead of discipline. "What did we say about wasting dessert?" More laughter scattered around the room. Vanessa dabbed frosting from the side of her neck with slow precision. Her diamond earrings shimmered under the chandelier light, while the faint scent of buttercream, an expensive perfume, lingered in the air between them. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching to see whether the black woman in the stained dress would explode, cry, or quietly disappear. Instead, she looked directly at Richard Whitmore. "Is this how your family treats business partners?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ballroom instantly. Richard's smile faltered for half a second before returning. "Come on," he said casually. "He's a kid. Don't make this bigger than it is." Vanessa noticed several board members exchange glances near the back tables. One woman lowered her champagne glass slowly, suddenly unable to smile anymore. A young black waiter standing near the curtain looked down at the floor as though he'd seen this kind of moment before. Evelyn stepped closer with polished grace, her heels clicking softly against marble. "We'll have someone bring you another dress," she said. "I'm sure the staff can help clean you up before the signing." The word staff hung in the air heavier than the frosting on Vanessa's gown. She understood exactly what Evelyn meant. Not partner, not CEO, not equal. Staff. Somewhere behind the cameras, somebody coughed nervously. The live stream continued rolling. And for the first time that evening, several guests began realizing the most expensive mistake in that ballroom wasn't the ruined dress. Vanessa Brooks had spent most of her life learning how to stay calm in rooms that never expected her to belong there. Even now, as hotel staff quietly wiped frosting from the marble near her heels, her breathing remained steady. The ballroom around her slowly restarted like a machine, trying to pretend it had never stopped. Glasses clinked again. Conversations returned in awkward fragments. The violin quartet resumed playing soft jazz near the stage, though the music sounded thinner now, strained beneath the tension hanging in the air. Vanessa handed the stained linen napkin back to a waiter with a polite nod. "Thank you," she said gently. The young man looked startled that she was thanking him at all. He could not have been older than 22. His name tag read Marcus. "Yes, ma'am," he replied quietly, lowering his eyes before stepping away. Vanessa understood that look too. She had seen it in elevators, conference rooms, private clubs, and luxury hotels all across America. The look people gave when they wanted to disappear before somebody richer became uncomfortable. A floor-to-ceiling window stretched along the western side of the ballroom, revealing the glittering Manhattan skyline beyond the rain-speckled glass. Vanessa turned slightly toward it, giving herself one brief second away from the Whitmore family's laughter. 30 years earlier, her mother had cleaned windows in buildings just like this one. Downtown Detroit, 12-hour shifts, aching hands soaked in chemical cleaners. Vanessa still remembered sitting on a plastic bucket near service hallways after school while her mother folded towels or vacuumed carpets long after midnight. Never let people decide your worth before you speak, her mother used to tell her while changing into her second uniform inside cramped employee locker rooms. Vanessa carried those words through every scholarship interview, every investor meeting, every boardroom where older white executives questioned whether she was the assistant instead of the founder. And now here she stood, Chief Executive Officer of Blackstone Tech, the woman responsible for one of the fastest-growing infrastructure software companies in the country, still being mistaken for someone beneath the room around her. Vanessa. Richard Whitmore's voice approached from behind with forced smoothness. She turned slowly. Richard carried the confident smile of a man who believed every problem could be erased with enough money and enough charm. His silver cufflinks reflected the ballroom lights as he adjusted the sleeve of his tuxedo jacket. "Let us not ruin a historic evening over birthday cake," he said. "The press already moves on from things every 15 minutes anyway." Vanessa studied him carefully. "You think this is about cake?" Richard exhaled through his nose, still smiling, though less naturally now. "I think emotions are high and people are watching." "Exactly," Vanessa replied softly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nearby, investors mingled beneath massive crystal chandeliers, while servers carried trays of lobster bites and champagne through the crowd. Huge digital banners rotated above the stage displaying promotional footage for the Whitmore partnership deal. $700 million. Enough money to save Whitmore Urban Development from the debt problems hidden beneath its polished public image. Vanessa knew those numbers better than anyone in the room because Blackstone Tech's financial team had spent 6 months reviewing every liability, every delayed project, every desperate loan extension buried inside Whitmore's empire. They needed her company far more than they wanted to admit. Evelyn Whitmore suddenly appeared beside her husband, perfume trailing behind her like a cloud of white roses. "The press coordinator wants everyone smiling before the signing ceremony," she said lightly. "Let us not give reporters unnecessary drama tonight." Vanessa looked directly into Evelyn's eyes. Interesting choice of words. Evelyn's expression tightened just slightly. "Excuse me." "Drama," Vanessa repeated calmly. "Your son humiliates a guest in front of investors and cameras, and your concern is whether people think it looks unpleasant." Richard glanced around quickly, noticing a few executives paying closer attention now. "Vanessa," he said lower this time, "do not turn this into something political." The sentence landed cold between them. Not loud, not angry. Worse, casual, as though dignity itself had become an inconvenience. The air inside the ballroom felt heavier now, thick with expensive perfume, forced smiles, and the quiet panic of people realizing they might have witnessed something that could not simply be laughed away. Vanessa Brooks stood near the edge of the massive glass windows overlooking Park Avenue, while rain streaked softly down the city skyline behind her. Across the ballroom, cameras continued recording guests beneath golden chandeliers shaped like falling stars. Somewhere near the center stage, a public relations coordinator whispered urgently into a headset while checking the live stream numbers climbing higher by the minute. People had started clipping the cake incident online. Vanessa could already feel the shift moving through the room like an invisible current. Not sympathy, awareness. Richard Whitmore adjusted his tuxedo again, the movement tighter now, less confident than before. "The signing starts in 20 minutes, he said carefully. "We have reporters from Bloomberg, Forbes, and CNBC waiting upstairs. Let us stay focused." Vanessa looked at him without blinking. "Focused on what exactly?" Richard forced a short laugh. "Business." "Business," Vanessa repeated softly, tasting the word like it suddenly meant something different tonight. Evelyn stepped closer before Richard could answer. "Vanessa, nobody intended disrespect," she said. Carter has a sarcastic personality. He pushes boundaries sometimes. Near the dessert tables, Carter Whitmore sat scrolling through his phone while two boys his age laughed beside him. The teenager did not look ashamed. If anything, he looked entertained by the attention. Vanessa watched him carefully for several seconds. Children learn behavior somewhere. That truth sat colder in her chest than the frosting still drying faintly against the fabric of her dress. A hotel employee approached carrying a garment bag with nervous hands. "Miss Brooks," the woman said softly, "your assistant requested this from your suite upstairs." Vanessa thanked her gently and took the bag herself. The employee looked relieved simply to be treated kindly. "You are going to change and come back down, right?" Evelyn asked quickly. Vanessa glanced toward the giant digital presentation screen hanging above the ballroom. Animated renderings of future Whitmore smart cities rotated slowly across the display, while the Blackstone Tech logo shimmered beside them in silver letters. The entire partnership had been marketed as the deal that would redefine urban infrastructure across the East Coast. $700 million. Thousands of jobs. Months of negotiations. And beneath all of it, Vanessa knew something Richard Whitmore desperately hoped nobody else would discover. Whitmore Urban Development was bleeding cash. 3 projects in Miami had stalled. 2 lenders were threatening withdrawal. Construction lawsuits were stacking quietly behind closed doors. Without Blackstone Tech software systems and investment support, the Whitmore empire would begin collapsing within 18 months. Vanessa had known that before stepping into this ballroom tonight. Richard needed her signature far more than she needed his approval. "Of course she is coming back," Richard answered for her quickly. "We are all adults here." Vanessa finally looked directly at him again. Interesting choice of words. Richard's jaw tightened slightly. What is that supposed to mean? Vanessa stepped closer, just enough for her voice to stay private between them. Adults apologize when humiliation happens in front of them. For the first time all evening, Richard said nothing. The music continued softly in the background while waiters moved carefully through clusters of wealthy investors pretending not to listen. Evelyn folded her arms. "You are making this personal." Vanessa's expression remained calm. "It became personal the moment your family decided dignity was optional." A flash from a nearby camera briefly lit the side of Richard's face. Sweat glimmered faintly near his temple, now despite the ballroom's cool temperature. Across the room, several board members from Blackstone Tech had begun quietly gathering near the back entrance. Vanessa noticed them immediately. Her chief legal officer, Daniel Reeves, met her eyes once from across the ballroom. No words, just a subtle nod. He had seen enough too. Vanessa slipped one hand around the strap of the garment bag and turned toward the private hallway leading upstairs. Behind her, the orchestra resumed playing, but the music no longer sounded elegant. It sounded nervous. The private elevator doors slid shut behind Vanessa Brooks with a soft metallic whisper that finally blocked out the ballroom noise below. For the first time in nearly 20 minutes, silence surrounded her completely. The elevator climbed slowly toward the penthouse suites while warm amber lights reflected against the mirrored walls around her. Vanessa stared at her reflection without expression. White frosting still stained the edge of her black gown near the shoulder seam. Tiny sugar crystals shimmered faintly against the dark fabric every time the elevator lights shifted. She looked composed on the outside. That was the part people always saw. The polished executive. The calm billionaire founder. The woman who never raised her voice. But beneath that stillness, something colder had started settling into place. Not anger. Clarity. The elevator opened directly into the private suite reserved for Blackstone Tech executives. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked rain-covered Manhattan, while muted thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the Hudson River. Daniel Reeves stood near the dining table with 2 other board members, their tablets glowing softly in the dim suite lighting. The moment Vanessa entered, conversation stopped. Daniel's eyes moved briefly to the frosting on her dress before returning to her face. "We saw the live-stream clips," he said quietly. Vanessa set the garment bag onto a velvet chair beside the window. "How bad?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Bad enough that 3 investors already called asking whether we are still signing tonight." One of the board members, Olivia Grant, folded her arms tightly across her navy blazer. "Social media is tearing Whitmore apart right now. The comments are brutal." Vanessa walked toward the window overlooking Park Avenue, 27 floors below. Headlights smeared across rain-soaked streets like liquid gold. "And Whitmore?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. Their stock dropped 4% in the last 11 minutes. Silence settled across the suite. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. She had spent years building Blackstone Tech into something respected enough that markets reacted when her name moved. Yet somehow, evenings like this still reminded her how quickly people reduced Black success to entertainment when they felt comfortable enough. Olivia stepped closer. "You do not owe them this deal anymore." Vanessa turned slowly. "This partnership affects thousands of employees." "So does character," Olivia replied immediately. Daniel placed his tablet onto the marble counter. "Richard Whitmore just sent 3 messages asking whether you are returning downstairs." Vanessa gave a faint smile without humor. "Interesting. Suddenly he remembers I exist." Another low rumble of thunder rolled outside. Rain tapped softly against the glass walls while distant sirens echoed through midtown traffic below. The suite smelled faintly of espresso and expensive leather furniture. Vanessa unzipped the garment bag carefully and removed a fresh, ivory-colored gown prepared for the signing ceremony. Her fingertips paused against the fabric for a moment. "Do you remember our first investor meeting in Boston?" she asked quietly. Daniel blinked once. "The one where they assumed you were the catering coordinator?" Vanessa nodded slowly. "I walked into that room carrying my own presentation materials because the assistant was late." A faint bitter smile touched her lips. "One of the partners handed me his coffee order before I even sat down." Olivia looked away, already knowing where the memory ended. Vanessa continued changing into the fresh gown with calm precision, her movements unhurried despite the tension tightening the room downstairs. "People always reveal themselves when they think there will be no consequences," she said softly. Daniel's phone vibrated again across the marble counter. He glanced down at the screen. "Richard says reporters are asking why the signing is delayed." Vanessa fastened the final clasp near her wrist and looked toward the city lights again. "Good," she replied. Daniel studied her carefully now. "Vanessa," he said lower, "what exactly are you planning to do?" She remained silent for several seconds while thunder murmured beyond the skyline. Then she reached for the thick black contract folder resting on the dining table. $700 million sat inside those pages. Enough money to rescue the Whitmore empire from disaster. Vanessa ran one hand slowly across the leather cover before lifting her eyes toward Daniel again. "I am planning," she said calmly, "to see whether they understand the difference between access and entitlement." By the time Vanessa Brooks stepped back into the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations lowered the moment guests noticed her descending the curved marble staircase from the upper level. The fresh ivory gown caught the chandelier light with quiet elegance, but it was not the dress that made people stare. It was the calmness in her expression, the kind that unsettled powerful people more than anger ever could. Below her, the ballroom glowed in gold and crystal while reporters repositioned cameras near the stage. Several giant screens now displayed the countdown for the signing ceremony. 8 minutes remaining. Richard Whitmore stood near the center platform speaking rapidly with 2 financial advisors. But the second he noticed Vanessa returning, he excused himself and crossed the ballroom toward her. "There you are," he said with forced relief. "The media team is getting anxious." Vanessa continued walking toward the stage without slowing down. "Interesting," she replied softly. "I thought emotions were supposed to move on quickly." Richard's jaw flexed. "Vanessa, enough." The words came out sharper this time. Nearby conversations immediately quieted again. "You made your point." Vanessa stopped walking. Slowly, she turned toward him while camera flashes flickered nearby like distant lightning. "Did I?" Richard lowered his voice immediately after noticing investors watching from nearby cocktail tables. "This deal matters to both of us." Vanessa studied him carefully. "No, it matters more to you." For the first time that evening, real concern flickered behind his eyes. Just for a second. But Vanessa saw it. Evelyn Whitmore approached quickly, diamonds glittering at her throat beneath the ballroom lights. "Everyone is waiting," she said tightly. "Can we please behave professionally?" Vanessa looked directly at her. Professionalism would have started with respect. Evelyn inhaled slowly through her nose, clearly struggling to maintain composure now. Across the ballroom, Carter Whitmore sat slouched in a velvet chair scrolling through online comments on his phone. Vanessa noticed his smirk fading the more he read. One of his friends whispered something nervously before showing him another video clip from the live stream. The boy looked up briefly toward Vanessa, uncertain for the first time all night. A hotel manager suddenly hurried toward Richard holding a tablet with pale hands. "Sir," he whispered urgently, though not quietly enough. "The investors from Atlanta are asking whether the partnership is unstable." Richard snatched the tablet instantly. "Handle it," he muttered. "Now." The manager disappeared back into the crowd almost immediately. Vanessa watched the exchange in silence. She could practically feel the pressure tightening around the Whitmore family now. Reporters were no longer smiling near the stage. Analysts whispered together near the back tables. Even the orchestra had stopped playing again. Richard stepped closer to Vanessa, lowering his voice further. "You are embarrassing everyone in this room." Vanessa's expression did not change. "No, Richard. Your family did that already." A long silence stretched between them while rain continued tapping softly against the towering ballroom windows. Somewhere behind the stage curtains, production staff argued quietly into headsets. Then Richard made the mistake Vanessa had been waiting for all evening. He sighed heavily and said, "You know how people are these days. Everyone wants to turn everything into race." The sentence landed harder than the cake ever had. Not because it was loud, because it was honest. Vanessa looked at him for several seconds without speaking while nearby executives pretended not to hear. Then she asked one simple question. "Do you hear yourself?" Richard immediately realized what he had said the moment the words left his mouth. His shoulders stiffened. "That is not what I meant." "It usually never is," Vanessa replied quietly. Across the ballroom, Daniel Reeves had already begun gathering the Blackstone legal team near the rear exit. Thick contract folders disappeared into leather briefcases one by one. Several Whitmore executives noticed and started whispering nervously among themselves. Evelyn followed their gaze and suddenly turned pale beneath her makeup. "Richard," she whispered sharply, "why are her lawyers packing up?" Richard looked over his shoulder. His face drained slowly of confidence. Vanessa noticed it happen in real time. The exact moment certainty left him. The exact moment he realized money could not automatically fix what arrogance had broken. The ballroom no longer sounded like a celebration. It sounded like people trying very hard to pretend they were not nervous. Conversations had broken into low whispers beneath the crystal chandeliers, while reporters refreshed headlines on glowing phone screens. Rain pressed softly against the massive glass windows overlooking Manhattan, turning the city lights outside into blurred rivers of gold and white. Vanessa Brooks stood alone near the edge of the stage with the black contract folder resting calmly in her hands. Around her, movement continued in careful fragments. A waiter adjusted champagne glasses with shaking fingers. A camera operator whispered urgently into his headset. Someone near the orchestra platform dropped a silver fork, and the sharp clatter against marble echoed louder than it should have. Across the ballroom, Richard Whitmore paced beside the investor tables while two attorneys spoke rapidly near him. His confident posture from earlier had disappeared completely now. Even from a distance, Vanessa could see tension tightening his shoulders beneath the expensive tuxedo fabric. Evelyn remained near the center staircase, arms folded tightly across herself as though holding together something beginning to crack. Carter sat alone now. His friends had quietly drifted away 20 minutes earlier. The boy stared at his phone screen without smiling anymore while thousands of comments flooded the live stream clips online. Vanessa turned slowly toward the towering windows behind the stage. Manhattan shimmered through the rain, like a city built entirely from reflections. For a brief moment, the ballroom noise faded behind her thoughts. She remembered another hotel decades ago. Not this glamorous. Not covered in crystal and marble. A small business hotel near downtown Detroit where her mother worked double shifts cleaning banquet halls after weddings ended. Vanessa had been 9 years old the first time she saw a wealthy guest spill wine across the carpet and point toward her mother without even looking at her face. Somebody clean that up. Just 4 words. Cold. Casual. Like human beings could become invisible inside uniforms. Her mother had cleaned the stain quietly without complaint. Later that night, sitting beside industrial laundry machines humming beneath fluorescent lights, she told Vanessa something she never forgot. The dangerous people are not always the loud ones. Sometimes they are the ones who laugh while dignity disappears. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly as thunder rolled softly beyond the skyline. The memory sat heavily in her chest now, because tonight had not truly been about a child throwing cake. It had been about the laughter afterward, the comfort, the entitlement, the certainty that humiliation would carry no consequences because wealth protected everything around it. "Miss Brooks?" A quiet voice interrupted gently beside her. Vanessa turned. It was Marcus, the young waiter from earlier. He held a fresh glass of water carefully in both hands. "I thought maybe you might need this," he said nervously. Vanessa accepted the glass with a soft smile. "Thank you, Marcus." The young man hesitated before speaking again. "My mom used to clean hotels too." Vanessa looked at him fully now. "Then she raised you well." Marcus swallowed hard, clearly emotional, before stepping away back into the crowd. Vanessa watched him disappear between clusters of wealthy guests wearing $1,000 suits and diamond necklaces. The contrast hit her harder than she expected. So many people inside this ballroom spent their entire lives being taught who mattered and who served. And tonight, for one uncomfortable moment, those lines had shifted publicly in front of cameras they could know. Longer control. Daniel Reeves approached quietly from behind, holding a tablet close against his chest. "The board is ready," he said softly. Vanessa nodded once. "And Whitmore?" Daniel glanced across the ballroom. "Their investors are panicking." Vanessa looked toward Richard again. He had stopped pacing now. He was watching her, waiting, hoping. But for the first time all evening, she noticed something missing from his expression. Superiority. In its place sat something quieter. Fear. The orchestra remained silent. The rain continued falling outside. And somewhere deep beneath the glow of chandeliers and polished marble, the entire ballroom could feel it coming. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage with the strained smile of a man who could feel disaster breathing down his neck. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone, his voice echoing awkwardly across the ballroom. "Thank you for your patience. We are honored tonight to celebrate a historic partnership between Whitmore Urban Development and Blackstone Tech." Sparse applause followed. Thin, nervous. The giant digital screens behind the stage illuminated the ballroom in silver and blue while camera crews repositioned themselves closer to the signing table. Vanessa Brooks stood motionless near the front row, one hand resting lightly against the black contract folder. Across the room, Richard Whitmore loosened his tie for the second time in 10 minutes before forcing himself toward the stage. Evelyn followed beside him, posture rigid beneath the chandelier glow. Carter remained seated near the back tables, unusually quiet now as headlines continued flashing across his phone screen. "Please welcome Mr. Richard Whitmore and Miss Vanessa Brooks," the announcer continued. This time the applause came weaker. Vanessa walked toward the stage with calm, measured steps, her heels clicking softly against polished marble while hundreds of eyes followed her movement. Rain continued falling outside the massive windows behind the ballroom, turning Manhattan into a blur of distant light. Richard reached the signing table first and extended one hand toward Vanessa with practiced charm. "Let us finish this," he whispered tightly as she approached. Vanessa looked briefly at his hand, but did not take it. A flicker of embarrassment crossed Richard's face before he slowly lowered it. Camera flashes exploded across the ballroom. Daniel Reeves and the Blackstone legal team stood near the rear exit, holding sealed briefcases against their sides. Several Whitmore executives noticed them again and exchanged increasingly alarmed looks. Vanessa took her seat at the signing table, while Richard sat opposite her beneath the glow of national media cameras. Thick contracts rested neatly between them beside two silver pens prepared for the ceremony. The master of ceremonies smiled nervously toward the audience. A $700 million agreement that will shape the future of smart infrastructure across the East Coast. More applause, this time even weaker. Vanessa opened the contract folder slowly. The soft sound of turning paper somehow echoed through the silent ballroom louder than the orchestra ever had. Richard leaned slightly forward. "Vanessa," he murmured carefully, forcing calm into his voice. "Whatever happened tonight, we can resolve it privately." Vanessa continued reading the first page without looking up. "Privately," she repeated softly. "That seems important to you now." Richard swallowed hard. Tiny beads of sweat glimmered near his hairline beneath the stage lighting. "Do not do this here." Vanessa finally lifted her eyes toward him. "Do what?" Richard glanced nervously toward the cameras broadcasting live across financial networks and social media platforms nationwide. You know exactly what. A long silence stretched between them. Then Vanessa closed the contract folder. Softly, deliberately. The click of leather against polished wood froze the room instantly. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Vanessa removed the silver signing pin from beside the contract and placed it carefully back onto the tablecloth untouched. Richard's face lost color immediately. "Vanessa," he whispered. She stood slowly from her chair and turned toward the audience instead. The ballroom lights reflected against her ivory gown while rain shimmered beyond the towering glass windows behind her. Every camera pointed directly at her now. "Blackstone Tech," she said calmly into the microphone, "will not move forward with this partnership." The sentence struck the ballroom like sudden thunder. Gasps broke through the silence near the investor tables. One reporter lowered her phone in complete disbelief. Somewhere near the back of the room, a champagne glass shattered against marble. Richard stared upward at Vanessa as though the floor beneath him had disappeared. "You cannot be serious," he said hoarsely. Vanessa looked down at him quietly. "I am completely serious." The giant screens behind them still displayed smiling promotional footage for a deal that no longer existed. Around the ballroom, panic spread visibly now. Investors whispered urgently into phones. Whitmore executives rushed toward one another with pale faces. Evelyn looked like she could barely remain standing. Carter stared toward the stage in stunned silence, while thousands of live-stream comments exploded faster than the moderators could remove them. Vanessa rested one hand lightly against the closed contract folder. "Blackstone Tech does not invest in environments where disrespect is treated as entertainment," she said softly. "And we do not build futures with people who mistake dignity for weakness." Nobody laughed this time. For several long seconds after Vanessa Brooks stepped away from the signing table, the ballroom remained completely frozen. The giant digital screens still looped promotional videos for a partnership that no longer existed, while rain streaked slowly down the towering windows behind the stage. Nobody seemed to know what to do first. Investors stared at their phones. Reporters whispered urgently into microphones. Somewhere near the orchestra platform, a violinist quietly lowered her instrument onto the velvet chair beside her. Richard Whitmore rose from his seat too quickly, nearly knocking over the silver water glass beside the contracts. "Vanessa," he called sharply. She kept walking. Her ivory gown moved softly beneath the chandelier light as she stepped down from the stage with calm, measured grace. Daniel Reeves and the Blackstone legal team immediately moved toward her side, but Vanessa lifted one hand slightly, signaling them to wait. Behind her, panic spread through the Whitmore executives like a crack moving through glass. Two board members argued near the investor tables, while financial advisors refreshed stock numbers with pale faces. One reporter near the front row whispered, "This is going to destroy them," before realizing her microphone was still live. Richard finally caught up to Vanessa near the center ballroom staircase. "Please," he said, lowering his voice as cameras immediately pivoted toward them. "Let us talk privately." Vanessa turned slowly. Up close now, Richard looked older than he had an hour earlier. The confidence that once wrapped around him like armor had vanished completely. "Privately," Vanessa repeated softly. Again, Richard glanced toward the cameras nervously before speaking. "You made your point." Vanessa's expression remained calm. "No, Richard. I made my decision." Evelyn Whitmore approached moments later, breathing unevenly beneath the weight of flashing cameras and whispered conversations. "Vanessa," she said quickly, "this does not have to become permanent." Vanessa looked at her quietly. Interesting choice of words. Evelyn swallowed hard. What happened tonight was inappropriate. Vanessa raised one eyebrow slightly. "Inappropriate?" Evelyn looked away for half a second, unable to hold eye contact anymore. "I am trying to apologize." Silence settled between them while rain tapped gently against the ballroom glass. Across the room, Carter Whitmore stood near the dessert tables staring toward Vanessa with uncertain eyes. The boy no longer looked arrogant. He looked confused, small, frightened by consequences he had never imagined could exist. Vanessa noticed him watching. Slowly, she turned fully toward him. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath again. Carter lowered his phone immediately. He started quietly before stopping. Vanessa walked toward him with slow, steady steps. Not angry, not cold, just composed in a way that made the adults around him seem suddenly immature by comparison. Carter looked down at the marble floor. I thought it was funny, he admitted weakly. Vanessa studied him for several seconds before speaking. No, she said softly. You thought humiliation was normal. The boy's face tightened. Behind him, Richard closed his eyes briefly like the sentence had struck somewhere deeper than business losses or headlines. Vanessa's voice remained calm. Children learn what they live around. Nobody interrupted her. Not the reporters. Not the investors. Not even Richard Whitmore. Because everyone in that ballroom knew she was no longer speaking only about cake. Carter's shoulders slumped slightly beneath the ballroom lights. I am sorry, he whispered. Vanessa held his gaze gently. I believe you are sorry now. The distinction settled heavily across the room. Richard stepped forward carefully. Vanessa, if this is about respect, we can fix this. Vanessa finally looked back at him. That is the problem. Richard frowned slightly. Vanessa continued softly. You still think dignity is something people give back after they take it away. Thunder rolled faintly across the Manhattan skyline outside, while cameras captured every second of silence between them. Then Vanessa reached into the black contract folder still resting beneath her arm and removed a single page. She handed it directly to Richard. His eyes scanned the document once before his face drained completely pale. It was Blackstone Tech's formal withdrawal notice. Already signed. Already finalized. Daniel Reeves had prepared it before Vanessa ever returned downstairs. Richard looked up slowly, stunned. Vanessa's expression never changed. Money builds buildings, she said quietly. But character decides who is trusted inside them. The ballroom doors closed softly behind Vanessa Brooks as she stepped out into the marble lobby of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. The noise inside faded immediately, swallowed by distance, thick carpets, and heavy gold-trimmed walls. For the first time all night, the silence around her felt honest. Outside the towering glass entrance, rain drifted steadily across Manhattan in silver lines beneath the streetlights. Blackstone Tech security staff waited discreetly near the revolving doors while Daniel Reeves walked several steps behind, carrying the remaining contract folders beneath one arm. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to explain. Behind Vanessa, muffled voices still echoed faintly from the ballroom upstairs. Reporters were already broadcasting live updates. Investors were calling emergency meetings. Somewhere above them, an empire built on reputation was beginning to fracture in real time. Vanessa paused near the lobby windows overlooking Park Avenue. Yellow taxi lights reflected across wet pavement while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas through the cold spring rain. The city kept moving. It always did. Daniel stepped beside her quietly. Your car is ready. Vanessa nodded once, but did not move yet. Across the lobby, hotel employees stood pretending not to watch her. A concierge near the front desk lowered his eyes respectfully when she glanced his direction. Two housekeepers paused beside a service hallway with folded towels in their arms. One of them was an older black woman with silver at the edges of her hairline. Their eyes met only briefly, but it was enough. The woman gave the smallest nod imaginable. Vanessa returned it softly. No words passed between them. None were needed. Daniel looked toward the elevators where several reporters had just emerged, speaking urgently into cameras. By morning, he said quietly, every financial network in America will cover this story. Vanessa stared out at the rain-covered city. Then maybe people will finally understand it was never about cake. Thunder murmured faintly beyond the skyline. A long black sedan waited outside the hotel entrance with headlights glowing against the wet street. As Vanessa finally began walking toward the doors, hurried footsteps suddenly echoed across the lobby marble behind her. Vanessa. Richard Whitmore's voice sounded breathless now, stripped completely of the confidence that had once filled entire rooms. Vanessa stopped, but did not immediately turn around. Richard approached slowly, his tuxedo slightly wrinkled for the first time all evening. He looked exhausted, smaller somehow, like the weight of public silence had finally become heavier than money. For several seconds he struggled to find words. I failed tonight, he admitted quietly. Vanessa looked at him calmly over one shoulder. Richard swallowed hard before continuing. Not as a businessman. His voice cracked slightly. As a father. The honesty in the sentence settled differently than everything else he had said that evening. No excuses. No negotiations. Just truth arriving late. Vanessa studied him carefully while Rain whispered against the glass beyond them. Children repeat what earns laughter, she said softly. Richard lowered his eyes. Somewhere behind him, the elevator doors opened again and another wave of reporters spilled into the lobby searching for comments. But for one strange moment, the noise around them no longer mattered. Richard looked up once more. I do not expect forgiveness, he said quietly. Vanessa's expression remained gentle but firm. Good. The word was not cruel. It was clear. Richard nodded slowly as though he finally understood something money had protected him from learning his entire life. Vanessa turned toward the exit again. The hotel staff silently stepped aside as she crossed the lobby beneath the warm chandelier glow. Outside, cool rain touched her skin the moment the doors opened. Camera flashes exploded instantly across the sidewalk while reporters shouted questions from behind barricades. But Vanessa never looked back. She stepped into the waiting car with calm, steady grace while rain shimmered across the streets of Manhattan around her. Upstairs, inside a ballroom still glowing with crystal chandeliers and unfinished champagne glasses, the empty signing table remained beneath giant screens advertising a future that would never happen. And somewhere in the silence left behind, the laughter from earlier no longer sounded powerful at all.